Chapter 10. It was a hot day in this part of Dordolum. Hot and sunny, with an oppressively still and heavy atmosphere that seemed to wrap around the silent lunchtime crowd like a wet grove fur blanket. The speaker currently shouting at the crowd from his perch atop the stand of public expression was adding to the heat too. But unlike the weather, his heat was a fiery one, a mixture of words and thoughts and stage presence carefully designed to inflame the emotions and stir up the dozens of long simmering resentments represented out there today. Practically everyone listening to the diatribe harbored at least one such quiet grudge, whether it be Ashuri towards Diamala, Barabels towards Rhodians, or Aquilish towards humans, or almost everyone towards Bothans. Letting his eyes drift across the crowd to the elaborate sign of the Bothan-owned Sulphur and Shipping Company directly across the plaza to their right, Drend Navet permitted himself a private smile. It was a good day for a riot. The speaker had made it his main topic now, and as he hammered in graphic detail at the horror that had been the destruction of Camas and the Bothans' cowardly and loathsome role in it, Navet could sense the crowd's anger finally edging towards the mindless fury that he'd been waiting for. Slowly, careful that his movement not break the spell for those around him, he began drifting towards the area closest to the shipping company. Cliff might be a genius at demagoguery, but it was he, Navet, who knew how to gauge a crowd's mood and pick the right time for action. Almost there. Navet was in position now, within easy targeting range of the shipping company. Dipping a hand into the bag hanging unobtrusively at his side, he withdrew his weapon of choice and waited. Another few seconds, and now. "Justice for Camas!" he shouted. "Justice now!" Cocking his arm over his shoulder, he spun and hurled at the Bothan building. And right on target, the overripe blicky fruit hit the door, splashing with a sickening thud and leaving a brilliant red stain behind. There was a startled gasp from a couple of Duros standing nearby, but neither they nor anyone else in the crowd was going to be given enough time to think about what they were being suckered into here. From a half dozen other places in the crowd, the cry for justice was echoed, and a half dozen other pieces of fruit splattered the building. "Justice for Camas!" Navet shouted again, hurling another blicky fruit. "Vengeance for genocide!" "Vengeance!" Someone picked up the call, the cry accompanied by more of the nuisance missiles. "Vengeance for genocide!" Navet threw another blicky fruit, and another. And then from somewhere an alien voice called hoarsely, echoing the call for vengeance. And as if that were somehow a signal, the crowd suddenly and gratifyingly collapsed into a mob. A rain of foodstuffs began to pelt the building, drawn from lunch bags and cartons and propelled by the mindless fury and pent-up rage that Cliff had so skillfully stirred up in them. A rage that Navet had no intention of wasting on a few fruit stains. Reaching past the last blicky fruit in his bag, he pulled out a rough stone. "Violence begets violence," he silently quoted the old maxim, and let fly. It hit its target window dead on, shattering the plastic with a crash that could barely be heard above the roar of the mob. "Vengeance for genocide!" Navet shouted, waving his fist at the building and pulling out another stone. The crowd were fast learners. The rain of fruit and eggs continued, but it began to be joined by some of the edging stones that lined the plaza's walkways and flower beds. Navet threw another stone as four more windows became jagged holes, then took a quick moment to search the skies around them. Even taken by surprise this way, the Dordol authorities wouldn't take forever to respond. And there was the expected response now, rapidly approaching from the direction of the spaceport. Three brightly colored custom air speeders with an escort of maybe half a dozen speeder bikes. Moving fast, too. They'd be at the plaza in less than 2 minutes, which meant it was time to go. Slipping a hand into his tunic to his hidden comlink, Navet tapped the call button twice, the signal for the rest of his agitation team to move to the edges of the mob and vanish into the afternoon sunshine. Then, reaching past the last two stones in his pouch, he pulled out his final present to the Bothans. It was a grenade, of course, but a very special grenade. Naved had personally taken it from the dead hand of a Myanmaran resistance fighter 10 years ago, during the Empire's brief reoccupation of that world under the meteoric reign of Grand Admiral Thrawn. What made this particular grenade so useful was that the resistance cell had somehow talked a visiting Bith into designing their weaponry for them. When the remains of the grenade were studied, as they most certainly would be, the New Republic would be forced to the conclusion that even the generally pacifistic Bith were beginning to join in on the side of the anti-Bothan sentiment. Perhaps that wouldn't matter. Perhaps none of this really mattered. Perhaps the aliens and alien lovers had so beaten down the Empire that nothing Navet and his team did could make any difference anymore. But as far as their duty was concerned, such possibilities didn't really matter either. Navet had seen the glory of the Empire, as well as its darker days, and if that glory couldn't be revived, then it was only fitting that he help bury it beneath the ashes of the New Republic. Pulling the safety, he flicked the detonator and threw. The grenade dropped neatly through one of the broken windows on the upper floor and vanished inside. He was halfway to the edge of the crowd when it went off, collapsing the roof and sending a spectacular fireball roiling into the sky. He was out of the plaza and walking unconcernedly down the street with the rest of the noonday strollers when the authorities arrived at the scene of the fire. The petition scrolled to the end past the long list of signatures. Leia looked up from her datapad, an ache in her stomach. No wonder President Gaversom had looked so solemn as he ushered her into his private office. "When was this delivered?" she asked. "Approximately 1 hour ago," Gaversom said, the tips of his wings brushing restlessly across the stacks of data cards that awaited his attention. "Under the circumstances, I thought you and Councillor Failure should be given advance notice." Leia looked at Failure. The Bothan was hunched in his seat, fur pressed completely flat against his skin. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you were the one who found the Kamas document in the first place," Gaversom said, flicking his tail in a Calabop shrug. "Because, like the Kamasi, you've had a world destroyed from underneath you and can therefore understand their plight better than most. Because, as a revered hero of the battle for freedom, you still have a great deal of influence with the members of the Senate." "I can't match the influence of these signatures," Leia warned, gesturing towards her datapad. "Besides," she hesitated, looking again at Failure, "I'm not sure I don't agree with them that this is a reasonable compromise." "A compromise?" Failure asked, his voice dead. "This is not a compromise, Councillor Organa Solo. This is a sentence of ruin for the Bothan people." "The three of us are alone in this room, Councillor Failure," Gaversom reminded him mildly. "There's no need for rhetorical hyperbole." Failure looked at the Calabop, his eyes as dead as his voice. "I speak neither rhetoric nor hyperbole, President Gaversom," he said. "Perhaps you do not comprehend how much time and effort would be involved in even merely locating an uninhabited world that would be suitable for the remaining Kamasi." His fur rippled. "But then, to further insist that we bear the cost of reforming that world to Kamasi's original specifications? We cannot possibly afford such an undertaking." "I'm familiar with the likely costs of such a project," Gaversom countered, his tone still patient. "It was done at least 5 times during the Old Republic." "By peoples arrogant in their power and their wealth," Thalia snapped, suddenly seething to life. "The Bothan people have neither such power nor such wealth." Gaversom shook his mane. "Come now, Counselor. Let us be honest here. The current state of overall Bothan assets is quite adequate to cover such a project. Certainly it would be a serious sacrifice, but not a ruinous one. I would further suggest that it represents your best chance of resolving this matter quickly and peaceably." Thalia's fur rippled stiffly across his body. "You do not understand," he said quietly. "The assets you speak of do not exist." Leia frowned. "What are you talking about?" I've seen the market reports. There are whole pages of listings of Bothan holdings. Thalia looked her in the eye. They are lies, he said. It is nothing more than a cleverly contrived datapad illusion. Leia looked at Gaversom. The other's restless wings had suddenly stopped moving. Are you saying, the Calabop asked carefully, that the leaders of the combined Bothan clans are engaged in fraud? The Bothan's rippling fur became even stiffer. It was to be only a temporary deception, he said, his voice dark with pleading. As our financial troubles themselves are only temporary. A grip full of bad business decisions has drained the combined clans of their resources and left us deeply in debt. And then this controversy arrived, causing even more uncertainty. New investors and contracts were needed, and so he trailed off. I see, Gaversom said. His voice was still calm, but there was an expression on that long face that Leia had never seen there before. You put me in a most awkward position, Counselor Failure. How exactly do you suggest I proceed? Thalia's violet eyes met the Calabop's pale blue ones. We can recover, President Gaversom, he said. It will just take a little time. Premature revelation of this information would be devastating, not only for the Bothan people, but also for those who have invested with us. Who have trusted you, Gaversom corrected coldly. Thalia's eyes slipped away from that accusing glare. Yes, he murmured. Who have trusted us? For a long minute the room was silent. Then, rustling his mane again, Gaversom looked at Leia. You are a Jedi Knight, Counselor Organa Solo, he said. As such, you have the wisdom of the ages and the guidance of the Force. I would ask your recommendation. Leia sighed. I wish I had one to give, she said. Have you made any progress in the search for the names of the Bothans involved with Kamas? Not yet, Leia said. Our intelligence people are still working on the original data card, but Crypt Chief Gent tells me we already have everything that we're going to get from it. We've also searching through the old Imperial archives at Camparas, Baudelaise, Oberoa Sky, but so far we haven't found anything. It was probably kept in the special files section, Gaversom said, with a whinnying sigh. The records of Imperial forces were ordered to destroy before retreating. Probably, Leia said. We're still hoping a copy somewhere might have survived. A small hope, though. Yes, Leia had to concede. Failure. How much time will the combined clans need to get back on their feet? The current projection is to have our other major debts retired within 3 months, the Bothan said. But at that time we will still be far from the financial position we are currently thought to be in. Gaversom made a noise deep in his throat. And how long until you'd be able to take on this kind of project? Leia asked, tapping the datapad. Thalia closed his eyes. Perhaps 10 years. Perhaps never. Leia looked back at Gaversom. I wish I could offer you advice, President Gaversom, she said. But at the moment, I can't see a clear path here. I understand, Gaversom said. May I encourage you to meditate and seek further guidance through the Force? I'll certainly do that, Leia assured him. The one thing that is clear, though, is that the Bothans aren't going to be able to meet the demands of their petition any time soon. Indeed, Gaversom said heavily. I'll have to attempt to buy some time. How? By offering it for debate? Leia asked doubtfully. That could be risky. More than merely risky, Gaversom agreed. If someone decided to bring it up as an official bill, the full Senate could end up ratifying it. At that point, I would have no maneuvering room at all. Leia grimaced. No room for Gaversom, and even less for the Bothans. They would then have to go ahead and create a new homeworld for the Kamasi or face the consequences of defying New Republic law. But as you know, the President is not entirely without resources, the Calabop continued. And there are certain parliamentary tricks that can be applied. I should be able to hold this up for a while. Leia looked at Failure. But not for the next 10 years. No. There was another brief silence. Well, Gaversom said, there seems to be little we can do right now. Except for one thing. I want the combined clan's financial records examined to confirm that the situation is indeed as described. Counselor Organa Solo, would you be willing to travel to Bothawui for such a purpose? Me? Leia asked, surprised. I'm not a financial expert. Yet you surely must have been taught the basics by your father Bail Organa when you were younger, Gaversom pointed out. The basics, yes, Leia said, but that's all. That will be all you need, Gaversom assured her. The trickery will be in the falsified documents, not the true ones. He gestured to Thalia with one wing. She will be allowed to see the true ones, will she not? Of course, Thalia said, his fur rippling unhappily. I'll alert the combined clan leaders that you will be coming. You will do no such thing, Gaversom said firmly. They are to have no notice whatsoever. Thalia's eyes flashed. You insult the integrity of the clan leaders, President Gaversom. You may see it any way you choose, Gaversom said, but they are to have no advance warning. And do not forget that Counselor Organa Solo is a Jedi Knight. If your clan leaders are not genuinely surprised by her arrival and request, she will be instantly aware of it. Leia kept her face expressionless. In point of fact, she'd always found the average Botham somewhat difficult to read, and wasn't at all sure she'd be able to tell if the clan leaders had been tipped off. But of course, Thalia didn't know that. I understand, he muttered. When do you wish her to leave? As soon as possible, Gaversom said. Counselor Organa Solo? We could probably leave within a couple of hours, Leia said, running quickly through a mental list of the necessary arrangements. Han would want to come along, of course. Come to think of it, it would be a good chance for the two of them to have some quiet time together. Chewie and the Nogri can watch the children here for us. The Nogri, Thalia murmured, an edge of bitterness to his voice. They should have killed that Deveronian on Wayland. Then none of this would have happened. The Deveronian did nothing deserving of death, Gaversom said quietly, and there has been far too much killing throughout the galaxy already. With more yet to come, Thalia countered darkly. Would sacrificing one life to prevent it have been such a bad bargain? That is a question all beings eventually ask themselves, Gaversom said. For those who wish to remain civilized, there can be only one answer. He settled his wings back into resting position across his withers and back. Thank you both for coming, counselors. I will speak with you again later. Moff Disra laid down his datapad. Very satisfactory, he said, looking at the others. It all seems to be going quite well. It all seems to be going quite slowly, Flynn countered sourly, leaning back in his seat with his feet hoisted up on a corner of Disra's ivory desk. We have what? A few pirate raids and maybe 100 riots to our credit? Patience is a virtue, Tierce reminded him. Even for soldiers. Especially for soldiers. Ah, well that must be the problem, Flynn countered. I'm a con artist, not a soldier. But I can tell you that in my world, you can't afford to string things out too long. You have to hook the target, taut the line, and then boat him. Zip, zip, zip. You give him too much time to think, and you'll lose him. We're not going to lose him, Tierce soothed. Trust me. This is a delicate stew we're creating. It merely needs to simmer a bit longer. Maybe you should turn up the heat a little, Flynn said. This is my greatest role ever, and so far the only people who have seen it have been the two of you and 4 Star Destroyer captains. When do I get to really show it off? Keep it up, and you may not get to show it off at all, Disra told him, trying hard to hold on to his temper. Flynn was starting to show all the eccentricities and quirks of a self-important stage entertainer, a personality type Disra had always despised. Don't worry, Tierce soothed. You'll get your chance for at least a private performance for the rebels, but not until we know where it will do the most good. We need to know which alien governments are for heavy sanctions against the Bothans and which are for forgiveness and peaceful conciliation. Which means you'll probably be showing off for a Mon Calamari or a Duros, Disrick growled, glaring under his eyebrows at Tierce. This particular scheme was one of the guardsman's latest brain twists, and Disra still wasn't at all sure he approved of it. The whole idea here was to use Flim to quietly inspire their Imperial forces, not scare the new Republic into coming down on their heads. Actually, the time is much closer than it looks, Tierce went on, ignoring Disra's comment. Our spies on Coruscant have heard rumors of some petition that's been filed with the President. If they can get hold of a copy and circulate it publicly, that should speed up the process. A few more days, I think, and we'll be able to move on to the next phase. I hope so, Flim said. Incidentally, I presume it's occurred to you that there's a very simple way the New Republic could resolve this whole crisis and cut the ground out from under us. Of course it has, Disra said with strained patience. All they need to do is find out which specific Bothans were involved with Palpatine's agents on Kamas. And you've taken steps to prevent that from happening? What do you take me for, a fool? Disra snapped. Of course I have. The only intact set of records is here on Bastion, and I've already dealt with them. Actually, that's not entirely accurate, Tierce said thoughtfully. The records at the Ubiquitate race base on Yaga Minor may also contain a copy. Disra frowned at him. Why haven't you said anything about this before? The subject of enemy information raids hadn't come up before, Tierce said. I knew you'd been into the Bastion records. I suppose I was assuming you'd taken care of the Yaga Minor copies as well. I haven't, but I can, Disra said. I'll head out for Yaga Minor tonight. That might not be a good idea, Tierce said. You going personally, I mean. The general in charge of the base knows Admiral Pelion fairly well, and with the Bastion library right here at hand, you really don't have a good excuse to examine his records. Disra frowned at him. So who's going to go there? You? I am the logical choice, Tierce pointed out. General Hestive doesn't know me by either name or sight, and I can make up a story that won't link me to you. As long as Pelion's grand tour of the Empire doesn't drop him there the same time I am, there shouldn't be any problems. Except how you're going to get into the special files section, Disra said. Tierce shrugged. I'll use a copy of your decryption method, of course. Disra frowned a little harder. You know, this is the second time you've tried to get that decrypt from me, he pointed out. One might wonder why you're so anxious to get hold of it. Would you rather the rebels got to the Kamas document first? Tierce countered. What in the Empire are you so afraid of, anyway? I'm not sure, Disra said darkly. Perhaps that all you really want, that all you've wanted from the start, is to get your nose into those files. Maybe I'm thinking that once you've gotten whatever it is you're looking for, you'll vanish and leave us holding the bag. Tierce smiled tightly. A minute ago, you were upset that I seemed to be taking over your grand project, he pointed out. Now you're worried that I might suddenly desert it? Make up your mind. You haven't answered my question, Disra bit out. What is it you're looking for in those files? I don't know, Tierce said. The Emperor had many secrets, some of which are bound to be useful to us. But I can't know which ones until I have a chance to look them over, can I? If it's all that simple and above board, why didn't you suggest it in the first place? Disra demanded. I could have let you look through the Bastion records. Fine, Tierce said. Consider the request made. However, if I go look at the files at Yaga Minor, I can take care of two problems at once, can't I? Disra grimaced. Except that if Tierce did his search at Yaga Minor, he wouldn't be able to look over the guardsman's shoulder while he did it. Across the desk, Flim stirred. We're all in this together, Your Excellency, he reminded Disra. Whatever secrets Major Tierce digs up, he can't possibly use them by himself as effectively as he can together with the two of us. Exactly, Tierce said, nodding. In fact, I'll go further. One of the files I'm hoping to find will only be useful in conjunction with the two of you. So there was something specific he was after. And that mysterious secret is? Dizra prompted. Tyr shook his head. Sorry. I'll definitely need help from the two of you to utilize it, but it's possible the two of you won't need me. No offense, but at this point I'd prefer to remain indispensable. Dizra grimaced, but he could tell that this part of the conversation was now over. He'd pushed Tierce as far as the guardsman was willing to be pushed, and had learned all he was likely to learn, and that was it. At least for now. You're still indispensable as the master tactician of our little group, Disra reminded him, waving a hand in dismissal. But if this will make you feel a little safer. He broke off at a quiet beep from the desk. What's that? Flem asked. My private comm, Disra said, frowning as he opened a drawer and looked at the access code. What in the Empire? You gonna answer it? Flem prompted. Stay out of sight, Disra said curtly, keying for the connection. Both of you. He straightened up and faced his desk display, arranging his expression into something hard and regal. The status report that had been on the display cleared and became a face. All right, Disra, Captain Zothop snarled. Let's hear it. What in blazes is going on? It's Your Excellency, Captain, Disra corrected him. And I was about to ask you the same question. You know the rules about contacting me this way. Vader, take your rules. I want to know. You know the rules, Disra repeated, the sheer iciness of his tone somehow silencing the other. This channel is never to be used except in case of emergency. He lifted his eyebrows. Or are you trying to tell me something has happened that the Kavrilhu pirates can't handle? Oh, it's been handled, Zothop said viciously. It cost me 2 men and one of my best bases, but it's been handled. What I want to know from you is how and why Luke Skywalker just happened to drop in for a visit. Disra frowned. What are you talking about? Don't twist me around, Disra, Zothop warned. Skywalker was at Karun, asking about your precious clones. Got out of our Jedi trap and we wound up having to blast and bust. I mourn with you in your loss, Disra said sarcastically. What does this have to do with me? What doesn't it have to do with you? Zothop shot back. First you pull out all of your clones, no explanation, and now suddenly Skywalker drops in for a visit. The pirate's eyes hardened. You know what I think? I think he's decided you don't need us anymore and pointed Skywalker our direction to try to close us down. What do you say to that? I say I'm looking at a pirate chief who's lost his nerve, Disra said bluntly. What of the Empire would I have to gain by eliminating the Kavrilhu pirates, even assuming I could pull off such a feat? You tell me, Zothop grated. I hear Admiral Pellion's people have been sniffing around the boots of our financial associates on Munilist and Bordeaux Prime. Maybe you're trying to burn your sky archers behind you before he connects us together. Disra snorted. Let me tell you something. Not only am I not worried about Admiral Pellion, neither you nor anyone else in the galaxy has reason to worry about him either. Not for long, anyway. Really, Zothop said, scratching under his shaggy black beard. I thought good Imperials didn't assassinate each other anymore. He's not going to be killed, Disra assured him with a smug smile. He'll simply stop being a threat. That's all. At the side of the desk, Tierce muttered something under his breath and snagged Disra's datapad. Yeah, sure, whatever, Zothop said. So then what was Skywalker doing here? Disra shrugged, watching Tierce out of the corner of his eye. The other seemed to be writing a message at furious speed. Perhaps he identified you during that botched job at Iphigenia, he suggested to Zothop. You said yourself that the ships that drove you away were a YT-1300 and an X-Wing. Solo and Skywalker? Could be, I suppose, the pirate conceded with ill grace. He still knew I'd been using your clones. Disra waved a hand in dismissal. He was hunting shoal darters, Zothop, trying to make a connection, any connection, between you and the Empire. He doesn't know anything. Maybe nothing about you, Zothop growled, but what about me? He's a Jedi Master, remember? He could have picked up all sorts of dirt from my men. Then you'd better bury yourselves somewhere for a while, hadn't you? Disra suggested, feeling his patience starting to shred around the edges. He didn't have time for this. Someplace where big bad Jedi can't find you. Zothop's face darkened. Don't try to dismiss me like a child, Disra, he said, his voice rippling with soft menace. Our partnership's been extremely profitable for both of us, but you don't want me as your enemy. Trust me on that. That works both directions, Disra countered. Tierce had finished whatever he was writing and had stepped around behind the desk, holding the datapad just over the display where Disra could read it. Trust me on that, the Moff continued, leaning casually forward as he tried to talk and read at the same time. There's no reason to end our relationship over something this trivial. Trivial? Zothop echoed. You call the loss of a major base trivial? Besides, I have another job to offer you, Disra said, leaning back in his seat again and throwing Tierce a faint smile. Score another one for their master tactician. If you're interested, that is. Zothop studied Disra's face suspiciously. I'm listening. In approximately 3 weeks, Admiral Pelion and the Chimera will be leaving Imperial space for a secret meeting at Pesiston, Disra said. I want you to attack him there. Zothop laughed, a single fix-like bark. Right, Disra. Attack an Imperial Star Destroyer with a few Telgorn pacifiers and maybe a Kaloth battlecruiser or two? Sure, no trouble. I don't mean attack with any intent of doing serious damage, Disra said patiently. All that's necessary is for him to come under fire. You could do that, can't you? I can do it, sure, Zothop said. Question is, why should I? Because I'll pay you twice your usual fee for harassing New Republic shipping. Disra let his voice drop to a soft purr. And because if you do, the Kavrilhu pirates will be first in line to reap the rewards when all of this is over. You're expecting there to be enough rewards to be parceled out, are you? More than you can possibly imagine, Disra assured him. Zothop snorted. You'd be surprised how much I can imagine, he said, but there was a thoughtful edge to his gaze now. Okay, I'll run with this a little while longer. Pesiton, you said. Right, Disra said. One other thing. I want whatever ships you send against the Chimera to be marked with Corellian insignia. Do you now? Zothop said, scratching under his beard again. Any particular reason? The same reason I don't care whether or not you actually inflict any damage on him, Disra said. Why don't you see if you can figure it out for yourself? I'll do that, Zothop promised. In the meantime, you see if you can figure out how to deposit the fee into our account. All right? Disra smiled thinly. A pleasure doing business with you, Captain Zothop. As always, Moff Disra, the other countered. I'll be in touch. The display blanked. Through the proper channels next time, if you please, Disra muttered towards the empty screen, allowing himself to slump slightly in his seat. Conversations with Zothop always left him feeling drained. At any rate, that should keep him off our backs for a while. As well as performing a useful service for us, Tierce said, taking the datapad back and blanking it. There's another military virtue for you, Flim. Never throw away allies until you're absolutely sure you won't need them anymore. We have similar rules in the Fringe, Flim said dryly. Not so eloquently put, of course. What exactly was that all about? What, Zothop's attack on Pelion? Disra asked. The attack itself, I understand, Flim said. You're trying to make Pelion think the New Republic has rejected his peace offer and is ambushing him instead. Disra cocked an eyebrow at the conman. Very good. You're learning. Though, of course, vision is always clearer in backsight. You're too kind, Flim said, tilting his head slightly in a faintly mocking salute. What I don't understand is why Corellian insignia instead of New Republic ones. Because that would be too obvious, Tierce told him. It would imply all of Coruscant had flatly rejected the idea of a meeting. Pelion knows they wouldn't do that, and would guess it was a setup. This way, it will look like it's just Bella Bliss, who's a Corellian, who is turning him down, Disra added. Pretending they're Corellian defense ships should also help explain why they aren't any star cruisers or other major capital ships in the attack. Right, Tierce said. Also bear in mind that we don't want Pelion giving up entirely on this surrender idea. At least not yet. If Bella Bliss had rejected his advances without official sanction, then Pelion's next move would be to seek someone else to make his overtures to. That will take time, which plays into our hands. More importantly, it will also require him to leave Pessiton prematurely. Even if enough of Major Vremel's message got through before he was captured at Morisham, chances are Pelion and Bella Bliss will miss each other. It should work quite well, Disra said casually, carefully concealing his own surprise. That last part hadn't even occurred to him until Tirce brought it up, but he had no intention of letting either of the others know that. Tirce was entirely too self-assured as it was, and Flim wasn't nearly respectful enough towards either of his superiors for Disra's taste. In the meantime, in Major Tirce's words, our stew needs a little more stirring. Are we ready for the Batharui riot yet? If not, we're very close, Tirce said. We'll use Navet's team, I think. They've been the most successful agitators. And we definitely want this one to be memorable, Disra agreed. I'll order them into position. We should also start activating the rest of the sleeper groups, Tirce said. There's no way to precisely plan our timetable, and we don't want them still asleep when we need them. Yes, Disra snorted gently, especially considering that if the real Thrawn were in charge, he'd probably have had the whole operation timed down to the minute. We'll just have to do the best we can, Tirce said, and trust our enemies to fill in the gaps for us. Meanwhile, I'll get over to Yaga Minor and see what I can dig up. Let's hope you find something useful, Flim said, getting to his feet. One thing that still bothers me. What was Skywalker doing nosing around a Kavrilhu pirate base? As I told Zothab, trying to connect us to them, Disra said. Don't worry, he won't be able to. But, besides, it's irrelevant, Tirce cut him off. Very soon now, a few clones and a grubby little pirate gang will be the least of the rebellion's worries. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you all soon.